Welcome to the Inspirational Leaders Series. This is going to be a conversation between two people who think about leadership a lot and are not afraid to go somewhere real with it. Jeff Chow, my guest, has been in the builder seat more times than most. He has been a founder, a CPO, a CEO, and now is leading both product and tech at Miro, which is a collaboration platform used by over 250,000 organizations. And I am a leadership coach and founder of Brazen Leadership Development. And my job is to ask questions that most people dance around. So this should be fun. Thanks for joining me, Jeff.
Hey, Teresa. So great to be here.
Yeah, I have been looking forward to this conversation because I happen to know you have a really interesting and rich background. And so I actually want to ask you about that. So you have been, as I said, you've been a founder, you've been a CPO, you've been a CEO, and now you're running both product and technology at Miro. And each of those roles requires a pretty different version of yourself as a leader, I imagine. And so I'm wondering about transitions, like which stage in your leadership journey was the hardest? And what did you have to let go of in order to make it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Trip down memory lane. So, I think if I were to really reflect, I would say the transition from founder to working at scaled organizations has been the hardest. I joke about trip down memory lane. My kind of entrepreneurial era was a little bit on the younger side too, but you know, there's an interesting aspect of being a founder where it's a little bit of like an us versus them mentality, right? Like you're a small, scrappy startup. Usually you're kind of trying to upend some incumbent, and you have some level of success on it. So you kind of have a nice little swagger too. And then you join this organization and they acquire you. They're actually bringing you in because they like what you're doing. And so you really get a little heady about it. And maybe the biggest transition I learned was that kind of pirate mentality, the us versus them, is not the best thing when you're in a large organization, right? It makes real culture clash. You don't necessarily assume the positive. You go in thinking like you know better, and I think that was a little hard learning lesson for me. I actually, my first two companies that I was fortunate to sell, I still text the leaders who acquired the company, and when I experienced the same thing, and I'm like, I am so sorry. I just witnessed it again. I'm like, sorry, I was that guy, and I think that's the area. So, and so like, what do you bring with it? An amazing kind of sense of innovation, excitement. What do you need to shed is I had to really mold the muscle of how do you get more people believing and coming in? How do you kind of assume the positive so that you can kind of work together to see where there could be changes and better opportunities. And your program is inspirational leadership. And I think a lot of that was where I cut my teeth to be like, oh yeah, okay. It's not about the smartest man in the room syndrome. It's actually about the global, we have to do this together. So that was a school of hard knocks for me, to be honest with you. Maybe one thing I would just say from like the CEO, CPO, and others that I find them all relatively the same at a certain point, which is at a certain point at like scale, you're basically, your job is to problem solve, communicate, and pace set, right? And it's depending on where you are, what like remit you have, whatever. And communication is obviously the most important thing, but like communicating the strategy, which is like problem solving, right? And then setting pace is really important too, just to kind of make sure everyone's aligned. When I was CEO, when I was CPO, or now my current gig, I mean, I think that's generally the same patterns that I'm experiencing.
So the roles at it's like the roles, there are differences, but there's some really common through threads. But where the real shift for you more was shifting from founder into like a scaled organization and scaling. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's, I think those are like real maturing moments, and I see it. We are a very acquisitive company. We bring in first time founders. We love their energy, and I found that it's been very valuable for me to have made those mistakes first, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to empathize, work with the teams, help them understand. Maybe share with them a little bit of like I see how you're seeing it, but like let me show you why this is important. And so it's actually very much I've taken those learnings and I've now kind of give back to entrepreneurs moving forward.
Cool. I mean, I think the thing that strikes me is it sounds like the energy that you had to have as a founder was like kind of in a way like a fighter, right? Like I'm going to have an idea, I'm going to make it happen, I'm going to crush the competition, and
Yeah.
and you have to have some of that like chutzpah, to
Yeah.
like to build something new, and take something that's like doesn't exist at all and then create something, right? And then interestingly, what you realized at a certain point is that in some ways, like too much of that could get in the way, because at scale, it really becomes more about collaboration, which
Yes.
ironically you now work or, are in a company that's all about collaboration. So
Yeah, it's incredibly meta at this point because Miro has to reinvent Miro to build the next Miro, on and on and on.
yeah,
And it's interesting you're saying that because that chutzpah, that innovation, that disruption, especially in this era, I mean, that's an ongoing thing that every organization can have. Maybe the tweak on that is, as a startup, you're sort of like a small band of people doing that.
yeah,
And I think the up level at a larger organization is like, how do you actually activate everyone? How do you make everyone
hmm,
feel involved? And it's not as easy as 5 people in a room or 20 people in a room or even 50 people in a room. It's like,
hmm,
we're a 1,500 person organization. How do you communicate that excitement and that energy? How do you activate people to be inventors themselves?
hmm.
It's just it's almost like a completely different muscle.
Yeah, I mean, in my work, I think of it in a way of like a leadership operating system, as
Mhm.
opposed to a single, charismatic, vision driven leader, which is great at a certain point, but that actually doesn't scale.
Yeah.
And, you're talking about the qualities of leadership where it's not just you, but everybody's got to be inspired and motivated and feel like they have a connection to what the work is about and that they're having an impact. And how
Yeah.
do you do that at scale?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
Steve Jobs wasn't Steve Jobs. I think that's
Yeah.
sort of even like the stereotype of like that type of leader generally has an amazing team that's, you
Right.
know, taking the kernels of an idea and sharpening it to the point where there's magic happening. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a good segue. What I find interesting, because we started talking about collaboration, is Miro is literally built for visual collaboration, all the messy, nonlinear, everybody thinking out loud kind of collaboration. And so I'm curious about whether leading inside of that product makes you more patient with how chaotic real human collaboration actually is, or if it makes you less patient because you have more of a view into what good can look like.
that's really interesting. I mean, I think I hate the like getaway of both, but definitely more patient, right? Like I think there's when you dig in, and especially if you're in a software company building these tools and you're trying to solve this problem, right? Like inclusive collaboration. How do you get everyone to kind of work together? How do you get like the most introverted person to like participate in a way that, because they generally have the best ideas and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's like you realize it's almost not the tool at all, right? It's all about psychology. It's all about, creating environments where people can participate. So that's where I have like deep empathy, right? Like by the time people reach our platform, we have ways to kind of ignite that, like those magic moments, but there's a little bit of work before that where you have to understand like the subtext of everything, right? And I think that's a
Mhm.
very interesting thing. And so I do have a ton of empathy around how hard it is to collaborate. And um, and and that's why there's these like rituals, right? Like design sprints or workshops or others, because you almost have to like rewire people's brains to say like, no, now's the moment where you're going to collaborate. And what we're trying to solve is like not having that. It's like, actually, that should always be on. Frankly, people are the most engaged, they're the happiest people, like employee engagement scores are the highest when that happens. So why isn't that all the time? And I think that would probably be why I also, when I observe when it's not working, I get incredibly like antsy, and I will say that maybe the themes for me are collaborative moments that just are like collaboration theater versus pure collaboration, right? So, think about somebody who loads a Google Doc, and they're like, I'd love feedback, everyone, and let's collaborate. First, they wrote the doc, so they just want, whatever. And then second, then all of a sudden, maybe you see like 1 or 2 comment markers, maybe 3, and all of a sudden, maybe it balloons to like 400 comments. And then all of a sudden, you're not solving the problem, which is let's have a really tack sharp narrative or like a great press release or an amazing strategy doc. It's like comment wars. It's like, I'm going to answer your comment. I'm going to edit this one sentence, and I'm going to do this other. And then you kind of watch it from afar. And I was like, has anyone reread the doc yet? Because it makes no sense, because you're basically doing these little jujitsus. And so those are the times I would say there's like collaborative moments in where people, reach out. They have a problem they need solving. And then, say like you reach out to an engineer, I need a problem solved. And the engineer is like, did you file a JIRA ticket? So like responding in a process versus the actual problem to solve. And then there's like the age old, like we're in a brainstorming meeting, but only 2 people talk, and generally they're like the most senior leader people, and so like those just gnaw at me, because it's sort of the, it's like, if you didn't talk and somebody did, and you see this avalanche of participation, that's good, and it's just like these blind spots in organizations.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's like collaboration or theater versus real collaboration.
Yeah.
Or like going through the motions of collaboration to check, sort of check off the box. That, well, we collaborated, and now I can run with the thing that I was going to run with. Just another.
I mean, have you ever had like a meeting where somebody is, they load a PowerPoint or something, and then they're like, hey, I'd love feedback. Feel free to interrupt, and then they like unfurl a 50-slide presentation and they're reading off the slides. And then you kind of just see like if it's remote, people just start turning off their cameras, and you're like, why are we doing this? Right. Like that to me is like those like false collaborative moments. It's like, and then genuinely, I bet they should have tried to get feedback, right? And so like, how could you do that? And so like, I think those are, and it's no ill will of the person, it's just more of like, those are the moments that are sort of like ingrained in some rhythms of, corporate inertia, if you will.
Well, so what do you think enables authentic collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when we work, we do everything on the canvas, and the collaborative canvas, and so therefore it's a real equalizer, right? It's like, we call it inclusive collaboration. You could call it like democratized space, but generally everyone has a voice and everyone's participating. I do believe like for the visual learning set, having something that is a little bit more spatial as opposed to like linear, where it feels very certain, right? It's almost similar to designers. You have lo-fi wireframes, people participate. If it's like perfect, you get totally different feedback, right? And so messy, unstructured work is such a great way to have it. At Miro, we actually have a term called bad version. We call it, and it just like, it empowers everyone to share like an idea, even, and they just, you just give them a little bit of a crutch to be like, if you just say bad version, then like no one's gonna be like, well, technically that's not possible, and something like that. And so, and it just sort of unlocks this new chemistry of people just like being willing to share ideas, being willing to share the how. even if we're trying to synthesize the why and the what. And so like, I think there's a lot of ways, but I think there's like this magic moment when you can see it. Like people are really yes-anding each other. They're kind of like taking one idea, running with another idea, going back. What I've observed is it doesn't take many people, right? Like say you have like 2 people in a room who are really good at it. Like the next people, they might not know how to yes and or whatnot, but like they then will latch on and start build off of it. It's great. It's wonderful to see.
Yeah. I mean, I think about in the environments I've been in and brainstorming myself, and then also in my client organizations. I mean, definitely culture is key, psychological safety. I mean, we hear that stuff thrown around, but what does that really mean? And one thing that what you just said made me think about is emotional contagion. It's this idea, neuroscience, that, your energy can be picked up or is picked up by other people, and especially leaders, right? Because everyone's looking to the leaders for signals for how they should feel about a session they just got invited to. So there's some of like how leaders model, in brainstorming and sharing half-baked ideas and welcoming half-baked ideas. There's a phrase that we used to say when I worked at I think it was Cooper, a design firm. It was the fidelity of the work should match the fidelity of the thinking. And I love that phrase because it captures what you were saying earlier perfectly, that if you show up with something super polished, then people's expectation is that it's mostly done and they can't really collaborate or give a lot of feedback. But if you explain, I'm at this stage and it's rough, but I want your input, that can impact it too. Go ahead.
I mean, one thing that we try a lot, and it's funny because as much as I say all this, it's a hard craft to do, is, there are moments where, say it's even a presentation, that like we always have these moments of like pause, everyone drop your ideas here. And again, it's like a canvas where you can put sticky notes on and you can put other things. It's interesting because I always hate that moment because of the awkward silence. And they're like, and I always, almost like 100% of the time, love that it happened, because then you see like the one sticky or idea, and then maybe somebody plus ones it, and then all of a sudden it's another, and then it's like popcorn, and then it's like you need that like moment to say like, hey, this isn't us steamrolling a narrative on you or steamrolling an idea. We're like earnestly curious about like feedback. We want to build off of that. And I think those like moments of even a traditional like, oh, I'm joining a meeting or somebody's going to have a presentation that then turns into a collaborative moment are really cool moments that I've experienced.
I totally know what you're talking about, where you can feel the momentum pick up and everybody sort of gets comfortable with like, there's nothing scarier than putting a thought on a blank space. I mean, I used to be a painter, an artist, and it's like that first stroke is like, okay, here we go. It also makes me think about, I don't know. I think you and I are similar in that, tell me if I'm wrong, okay? But I think we're both like, coming up with ideas is not a hard thing. Like we are idea generators really naturally. We have lots of ideas. We have strong perspectives about what those, what works and what doesn't work or what should be explored. And I find I really have to rein that in myself because, like, for example, don't be the first person to share the idea, because immediately it changes the whole dynamic, and then everything becomes about what the leader in the room is, where their idea is versus like open space for everybody.
Funnily enough, I tell my team and my kind of like my leaders, I'm a better coach than I am a player because I can tell them that I can spot it. It still is really hard.
Because
and I'll find myself 5 minutes into a monologue talking about my amazing, brilliant idea, realizing I just sucked the entire wind out of the room. And the teams are like, they're like, yeah, really great idea, boss. And I'm like, oh, you don't mean that at all, do you? So, but I do think you're right. It's like you need that, that first person to share, and it's really cool when you see it working over time, because then it becomes just natural, and
Yeah.
like really great teams who are used to
Yeah.
working together. It's like there's no awkward silence. It's just like, let's work on it. And then all of a sudden, you don't need those templates of like ways of working. It's just like there's this
Right.
kind of like shorthand. And then you're off to the races. Then it's like, okay, this is like a really finely tuned machine at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. You definitely, I have worked in cultures where it's very it's like how we do things here. It's
Yeah.
very ingrained.
Yeah.
And if I think about those cultures, I think the place that was the most like that was a design firm called Adaptive Path. And it was because of the culture. There was, I don't know, like it was really easy to riff with people.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel scary to do it. And I think in work, I know in work environments, and especially the bigger, larger organizations, it gets harder and harder to create those safe spaces, because work naturally is a place where people feel unsafe taking risks, because their paychecks are tied to it, and their mortgage and their children's education. So, I like with leadership teams, that's something I explore with them a lot, is how to really how to help people feel much more comfortable, because you have to work against that natural human tendency to be afraid.
Yeah. And you're totally right. I mean, maybe one of the other things I've learned throughout my career is, as much as we don't want it to be, power structures do matter.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's
even in flat organizations.
100%. And I think that's a little bit of the, back to my blind spots, right? Like, I want to be the fun Jeff that like boogies with the team and like jams on ideas, and it's going to be fun, and we're going to invent the future. And then you kind of realize, as much as they do love to boogie, there's like a little bit of like my fingers implicitly on the scale, and it's not everyone. But maybe even then more junior people who are like, oh my God, it's like these are types of things that, and I think that's almost the reason you don't speak first. It's like you gotta let the teams go, and then I think the skill I've been trying to hone moving forward is sharpening ideas. It's like I think generally you get into this phase of either you have an idea, you want to like express some observation that is like a broad stroke, like, hey, the strategies needs work. But really the best way to do things is like take the thing that they lay out and just like, how do you help them sharpen it in that moment? And that is a whole skill unto itself. So
yeah. And asking a lot of questions to help them arrive at the revelation is even stronger, as opposed to just telling them, which is hard. That's not always easy to do. 100%. The other thing that you sort of nodded to is building a relationship with the people around you that's strong enough that people will tell you truth to power.
Yeah.
And they'll pull you aside and say, hey, you totally steamrolled that whole conversation. And a lot of people got too quiet, and we didn't get the things that we needed from them, and we missed out, and, flagging it for you. Like, you have to be I think a self-confident leader to develop those kinds of relationships with people around you, but it is totally in service of you and the business too.
100%. Yeah. I mean, again, back to things that I by no means am perfect at it, but like, I think there is a, it's interesting. You hear the terms like radical candor, and then everyone's like, oh, really great idea. And then like, they just go and drop a truth bomb on somebody they don't really know very well. And it's like, well, I kind of know why that didn't work. And so like, I think there is a little bit of like, we have to like have a relationship. We have to talk about things. We have to, one reflection of myself is that I do love to have like a lot of fun, joke around. but then we're a business, we're pushing pace. There's certain times that I have to be pretty sharp, and it's pretty disorienting for teams, right? Like they're like I thought we were just having fun, and all of a sudden it's,
Mhm.
um, and I think those are moments though that when you build that level of trust, it's not disorienting, and like people will get it, and like you know, uh, we can dance, and then we can also, get really serious really fast to work a really hard problem. And
Mhm.
that's what makes a great team, right? And so like to foster that though is not easy, and it takes time, and it takes relationships, and it takes care. And frankly, you know, uh, as a company that's rather distributed, it takes a lot of in-person moments where you have to like
Yeah.
truly know that we're humans each, you understand what makes each other tick. And so like, yeah, it's usually you don't rush into it, but then when it starts happening, it's pretty great. And I love it when people give me hard feedback, like
Mhm.
not unsolicited, not through some focal cycle or whatnot, but like legitimately, because it's like a shared caring,
Mhm.
and it's amazing when it happens.
So how do you let people know that? Because that's not something people would do naturally.
Yeah, I think we'd have an amazing product if we can actually answer that number one question, right? Because I think there wouldn't be things like anonymous message boards and things like that. People would just give it to each other.
Well, I
But
meant more like you, Jeff. How do you signal to people that you want them to tell you
yeah,
truth to power and
look, I mean, I have no problem admitting if I have made a mistake, right? I've learned over time that like there's no wizard behind my curtain. There's just one me. So like if I screw up, I screw up, and I'll share it with the team, and I'll own up to it. Um, Sometimes I have to model the behavior where if there's like I can feel the vibes, I'll call it out. Be like,
Mm,
you
mm,
know, guys, I feel like I stalled this out, and it's like you kind of invite the like, okay, are they willing to, so I would say I have to be the first mover to like put myself out there to build that. I also have people I've been working with for a long time, right? And like we all are like passionately care about each other. We're very mission focused. We care about like outcomes above all else. And so like in those moments, if it does feel safe, and they actually help model the behavior for others, right? It's not just, there. So like I think it helps to have people who know your rhythm to then model
mhm,
the behavior for
mhm.
others to do that rhythm as well.
Yeah. So you had a rich history of building relationships. So you've brought people along, yeah,
Yeah.
and you've got some of those folks around you. And then I think that's one of the best ways you can signal is calling it yourself. I mean, there's a lot about leadership that's either not going first or going first,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's a space where going first actually can be helpful, is acknowledging yourself, what you feel.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, um, I am also interested in, because we're talking about some of the stuff that's really tricky about leadership,
Yeah.
multiplying leadership or multiplying yourself. You sort of got at that a little bit earlier. As you grow in your career, and definitely when you're at the scale that you are, um, you have to scale your own leadership, and you've built and scaled multiple companies. And I'm curious about, this something that I see happen a lot with leaders is becoming the bottleneck and
Mhm.
struggling with the the transition, or basically multiplying leadership beyond themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm curious where you are on that spectrum. Like, where would you say you are right now, and what's helped you to get to wherever it is that you are?
Yeah. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of founder CEOs, and I have been one myself. And so, yeah, this might not be like the typical motion, although I do believe it's becoming more typical. But um, counterintuitively, I think scaling yourself doesn't mean actually scaling away from like the details. It
Mm,
means like trying to figure out some other way to work in a way, building trust. Others, I mentioned the like communication, problem solving, and pace setting as like rhythms. I'm a big believer in standardized ways of working, right? Like you create these processes that are lightweight, but then everyone has a shorthand. So it just like cuts through a lot of the friction. I am a big believer in like the people aspect of like what is the right chemistry of teams so that they can work autonomously, but also be involved and they have the right temperament. So like for in the product organization is engineering, product, and design. And so, you might have a great operationally minded, product manager, then you need like an amazingly creative designer, and so like you need to kind of complement each other. So there's a little bit of like team architecture aspects, and they all work in concert. And when that happens, then I'm not necessarily scaling myself out versus scaling the system and the OS and generally involved, right? And so, and maybe the last one is a culture of there's not much being talked about this, but it is like layer collaboration, altitude collaboration, right? People tend to say like managing up, right? I have to say like managing up sounds very political to me. It's like, here's how you should talk to them, like you should say this, say that, and it's like, no, actually, we're all here to solve a problem. My like span of like my surface area is probably wider, but your surface area adds up to my surface area. So we should be collaborating. We should be, working. You should be, hopefully I've earned the, if I haven't been involved, you should be like, hey, I want to show you this because I'm not sure what the best impact is. Let's work because you have a better vantage point, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we need to see more of that, right? Which is not like, let's do a review up to the executives. It's more about the like, how do we actually dance at every altitude in the common cause of delivering a higher order outcome, right? Like a bigger business impact. And so, I think that's a lot of when I've tried to scale, I've actually tried not to scale at all, right? It's just like, I think in like fractals, I think about like, okay, if this team is behaving the same way as I am, every new employee at Miro that's in my organization, I generally tell them, I was like, I literally do exactly what you do. It's just like my like purview is just much wider, but I expect you to pace set, problem solve, and communicate. I pace set, problem solve, and communicate, and when we do it well, we're sort of like working together, and there are moments we're going to intersect and it's going to be amazing. And there are moments we're not, but hopefully when I'm communicating, you understand the whys and the whats, and we're all solving hard problems together, right? And so that's like the easier said than done version, but like ultimately I think that's generally the problem I try to solve so that everyone's generally involved.
Well, it's interesting. So there's a few things in there. There's one is stylistically, you want to try to reduce politics, I think is one thing I'm hearing, or the what does definitely show up in some organizations is the leaders up here, and you have to really politic your way up to that person. I think there's both it sounds like you're accessible, and you're also trying to communicate that the way that you view leadership yourself is like, we're all in this together. I have a role, you have a role. We're all working toward the same cause, and we all should have certain behaviors. And
the more consistent those behaviors are, the easier it is for all of us to work together, right? I'll give you another example is in like, corporate lore, the one-on-one, right? And it's like in product, you can't actually do anything without, product designer and engineer. It's changing a little bit with AI, but like generally you need a team to deliver it, right? And so I found that one-on-ones in certain areas have become more like excuse making, right? Or like, like you sidebar to be like, well, the engineer said it's going to be, like 2x the time I thought. So that's why. And it's not everyone, but like there are these moments where it's just like, it's human nature, right? Like you're having a person, you're talking about the work. And so I've actually instituted less one-on-ones, like they're kind of monthly with like real focus on your craft, mentorship, handling people matters, and having more often like what we call trios, like the team together and to work the problem together, right? So I will join 4 other people, and we'll like talk about the work, like, and talk about the challenges, talk about the triaging that's necessary, and encourage, if there's conflict, to kind of like escalate together, right? It's like, hey, I think we should ship now, and like with less capabilities, they want to like wait for the architecture to be perfect. Let's talk about it. And I found it's actually made a better culture, because then they're not thinking first to be like, I'm going to tell somebody else. I have to tell the person to then bring it up together. And so, and again, that's a lot of people talk about the art of escalation, of like, it's way better to bring it together than it is to, you're not escalating if you're doing a sidebar, right? And so that's a lot of like kind of the changes.
Yeah, I mean, what you're getting at in a way is empowering their leadership capabilities. So it's making me think of there's a leader that I'm working with that had an experience around someone came to them about an issue, and then they went and talked to the other person. And we talked about one of the things that can happen in that situation is something that isn't actually that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And that the person actually would benefit from learning how to address directly, because you as the leader talk about it. It's this size of a big deal, and inadvertently trying to help, but then they're not learning to take ownership of challenges. Not to say, I mean, not everything, right? People should handle on their own, but it's an interesting dance there.
100%. Well, it's the one other one that you brought up to my mind is, part of the job of a leader is to put people in like uncomfortable situations to figure it out themselves. And like, there's nothing harder than the heart to heart. It's like, hey, you're having this challenge, this person, what do you do about it? And generally people are conflict avoidant, so they don't want to do anything about it. It's like, have you had the heart to heart? And they're like, no. And you're gonna like, they don't have to say no. You're just like, yeah, okay. And then it's like, I think I'm gonna hold you accountable to have a one-on-one, talk about what that was. And then almost like every single time they'll come back in a week, if they weren't slippery and avoided it, and would say like, oh my God, like that was crazy. Like I learned that their thing, and they're like, their kid was homesick, and they were just a little bit like whatever, and like, oh wow, that was crazy. And they're like, oh, why don't people do that more often? But like that's another great one to kind of like, your job is to kind of push them a little bit into the uncomfort zone to get there.
Well, and what that requires is something that's actually an underpinning of coaching philosophy, which is that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. Everyone has the capacity to solve their own challenges, get creative about how they do it, and they're not so broken that they're unable to do that. It's so it's a mindset. And I do see, when I work with leaders, the more they can lean into that, it's really gratifying, because they start realizing how much they don't actually have to solve for people, and people start blooming, because it's in a way, it's a way of signaling, I have confidence in your capacity.
That's right.
There's a phrase I heard Adam Grant use once. It was something like, I have high standards because I know you can meet them. Makes me think of that too.
I love that.
Yeah. I'm also, well, actually, you know what? We're near time. So I'm not going to ask my last question. I'm going to ask you later offline.
How is this the first conversation that didn't even say AI?
That's refreshing, right?
Should that be the refresh? This is the no AI episode.
The no AI episode.
Okay.
Straight up leadership, because you know what? All the issues are still there. I mean, anyways. Okay, so answer me this, and then we will wrap. Just we meandered. We talked about a lot of things, everything from like lessons you've learned on your journey and collaboration. And I'm curious what sticks out to you about this conversation.
I love these types of conversations because it's not like I have a fully baked view, and it's actually really helpful for me even just to say something out loud to synthesize ideas that are just kind of in my head, and like honestly, half part therapy session to like reflect on like all the like mistakes and
Always.
things moving forward. No, I think I've learned that you know that these are shared challenges that, as you've codified that as like these are some of the patterns that you see kind of as you're teaching. And for all leaders in the world, I don't think there's um especially in the LinkedIn world of like everything's perfect and this is like, how I did XYZ and I did it perfectly. um it tends to make people feel like, oh, like imposter syndrome
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatnot. And I think what I've learned on this one is just that, yeah, no, like, or what I want, listeners to learn too is like, no, it's like, it's really freaking hard and you're going to make a million mistakes and you're going to grow from it and your team's going to be okay as long as you're curious and are willing to grow yourself. So,
Yeah, that's beautiful. You are speaking my leadership love language because you're basically talking about democratizing leadership.
mhm.
And I know that leadership can be taught, and there's all different kinds of styles. And I'm I'm super glad that we were able to have a conversation and just be really candid about what you've learned, what I've learned, what's tricky, what we don't totally have figured out yet.
Amazing.
And the other theme that was in there is leadership as a team sport. When we were talking about scaling, like there underneath that, you have a mental model of everyone should be exhibiting leadership behaviors, which I totally believe in too. So thank you for sharing.
Of course,
And
thanks for having me.
yeah, and folks, if you want to reach out to either of us, you can find us on LinkedIn. We are alive and well over there. And if you want to know more about Miro, you can check out Miro.com, Miro.com. And if you're interested in checking out my company, look up brazenleadershipdevelopment.com. Lovely to have you.